So now I would like to introduce our next speaker. He is Dean Frew, and Dean is going to be talking about how item-level RFID is essential for the new era of BOPIS and all retail process. Dean is the Chief Technology Officer and Senior VP of Solutions for SML Group. Dean?
Hey, Mark, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you and we can see you.
Great, excellent. So appreciate, again, the opportunity to partner with RFID Journal as a platform. And today, what I hope to be able to do is just talk a little bit about what we've seen pre and post COVID, or while we're still in the middle of it, we are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, and talk specifically about BOPIS and how BOPIS is being addressed across the entire supply chain. So I hope the audience finds it interesting, and one that I think is enlightening from the standpoint of our perspective on the ground, if you will, with retailers around the world. So first, quick introduction. SML has two key components as part of item level RFID. First is the RFID tags, which we produced over 2 billion of those last year for retailers around the world, different offerings from stickers to packaging. The most RFID inlays certified with some of the newest ones, which are using M700 and U9, as well as eco tags and dual tags. So a lot of innovation going on the tag side for us and service bureaus around the world. In parallel with that, we have the enterprise software, where we have over 4,700 stores live around the world. Every week, over 200 million items are counted on our Clarity in 34 countries with a high level of inventory accuracy. And our retailers have documented over $1 billion of profit that have been added to their stores over the last 5 years. So real exciting to see how the technology is beyond the lab and beyond little tests, but being used to drive value in enterprises. And I think that's one of the messages for for those of you who are in the audience who haven't adopted yet, to be able to see there are significant benefits being created both in stores and now in the supply chain as we move forward. And I would say one of the interesting use cases we found is on the sustainability front, where we have one retailer that's gotten rid of 400 shipping containers worth of product, and yet still increase their sales. So there's an understated, talked about benefit of item level inventory management along with your sustainability metrics across your stores that can be real if you leverage the technology accurately. And then just last, I mean, folks are selecting us because of the ROI. It's an ROI discussion, not a technology feasibility discussion, but you combine the ROI with technology and a team, and we do great things. So that's my shameless commercial for our team and our products. Let me talk a little bit about what we saw during COVID. The largest disruption that hopefully we'll ever see in our lifetime took place during the COVID disruption a year ago, and where we saw factories, DCs, and stores have demand that dropped off. We had supply that dropped off, and created inventory value propositions and inventory problems throughout. And many of you who are on the call in the audience saw this in your own life. We had an interesting position by we were involved with numerous retailers who were dealing with the struggles of trying to open stores in May of 2020, not knowing what they had, or to basically help manage inventory distribution centers that had been piling up from February and so on. So what we saw during this disruption was that that this pipe, if you will, of 3 billion units a month, which is roughly what the European US supply chain is for soft goods, apparel and footwear and home goods, when that disruption combined with the consumer change of wanting to buy online and retailers needing to be able to look at new technology in their stores to be able to leverage their stores as a base of fulfillment centers and mini warehouses is really what we saw as being the big change and the big discontinuity last year. And I want to talk a little bit about each of these three parts of the supply chain and walk through just kind of some of the observations we had and some of the things that we saw retailers adopt and how they were able to leverage it. And now, while the crisis has normalized a little bit, we are seeing that these retailers are all using these technologies for what is really this new normal, if you will, in how retail stores and consumers interact with one another. So first off, on the factory side, there was little interest in item level technology at the factory before COVID. We saw most of the activity in the factories was basically just the application of RFID tags on product. It was no different than the tags that we're putting on before it to the factory worker. The factory worker would get a stack of price tickets and they would apply those onto garments or stickers onto poly bags, etc. And really, there was no interaction with the RFID at any point during that process. One of the misnomers out there is that RFID is difficult at the factory level. The reality is the way that our service bureaus support factories today is the same. It's just a different tag that we're submitting into those factories as far as order fulfillment. What we saw was coming out of the crisis was a real need for the downstream customers, both at the DC and the store, to have a real strong understanding, a much more accurate understanding of flow of goods. So at the SKU level, where everything is counted manually one by one, the ability to move to an item level model allowed us to help our customers address what is the upstream flow of goods at the style, size, and color level, as an example, down into the DC level. And specifically on outbound, making sure the shipment accuracies are correct. And we've seen a growing interest in factories looking at using the item level RFID technology to provide more accurate downstream information. So that the DC now has a much better idea of what's coming at them. And so while the factory has its own challenges, we have factories that we've worked with around the world. Some of them are not set up technology-wise with networks to be able to support. We are seeing that technology infrastructure piece is one of the things that's being invested in many factories so that they can actually use the technology to support their downstream customers with better information. In the distribution center, it was very similar. We've got a number of projects that have been live since 2011 around the world in distribution centers, largely on the outbound side to support mandates from Macy's and Walmart's and Marks and Spencer and so on. What we saw is before the crisis, is that they were doing a lot of manual activity on their inbound process of what was coming from the factories. And what we saw during the transition was there was a real enlightenment, if you will, that we needed to be able to manage both inbound and outbound out of the stores much more effectively, and out of the DCs much more effectively. And various forms of receiving are being adopted, whether it be a tunnel on a conveyor, whether it be a manual tunnel, whether it be a portal, whether it be a handheld. There are multiple forms, and there is not one form that fits all for their receiving processes. On an outbound, on packing, whether it be downstream to another distribution center or whether it be downstream to the stores themselves, we've seen a growing interest of using item level RFID to drive those processes. And again, in both the factory and the distribution center, we're not replacing the warehouse management system or the material ERP in a factory. What we're basically doing is enabling those systems to be much more accurate by putting technology smartly placed, smartly scoped, to be able to drive better processes by leveraging the RFID tags that are flowing through their factories and their DCs. And I will tell you that every one of our customers who have adopted in the stores, every single one are now moving up into the distribution center layer for things like receiving and so a couple of other use cases like outbound in their DC, but mainly receiving. So, one way to think of it, if you're in the audience and you're already a wholesale, your wholesale business is providing tags to a downstream customer. And if you're a retailer and you're basically your DC, you're processing RFID tag product, usually the first place we encourage people to start is at the receiving side of that process in your distribution center. And to be able then to know exactly what you have, which enables you to do a couple things. It allows you to look upstream and evaluate your suppliers and make sure that their shipments are correct. And in every single case, the receiving is proved to have a really strong value proposition in the distribution center. In the store, that's where the biggest part of the ROI is. We did see, before COVID, there was a realization that, hey, I know I need to look at this. It's something on the roadmap for many retailers. They were picking in stores. Some were picking in stores with BOPIS. Most of their online product was being picked in the distribution center. But 90% of the market was still operating at around less than 70% item level inventory accuracy. And where that comes from is that you do a physical count once a year. That physical count, let's say, is in the low 90s in item level accuracy, which means style, size, and color quantities are correct. And then every week you see a plus or minus 2% error in receiving. And by the time you get to 7 months down the road, you're at your ERP is somewhere around 65 to 70%. And of course, that causes significant cancellations and issues associated with BOPIS, as well as on shelf availability. And that's where the value propositions are. So there was some interest in that. About 10% of the market has adopted it in US and Europe for apparel and footwear. We're starting to see a much greater movement. And the reason for that is the next part, which is basically just that retailers really struggled being able to do buy online, pick up in store, and to be able then to also open up their stores and have accurate availability, on shelf availability for consumers. And so in all cases, we saw that in all of our new clients and all of our existing clients, BOPIS was the number one item that was the driver behind getting tags on product, getting good inventory counts, getting good receiving processes, getting good ability to find product for picking using our Clarity system. But BOPIS was the foundation. That was the change. That was the burning platform, if you will, that caused retailers to move forward. And with that, it's natural. We were able to basically, come into environments that already had RFID in them, and rapidly we're moving those over to RFID-based BOPIS picking, interfacing with the order management system, not replacing the order management system, but basically being that execution arm in the store. That's how retailers are adopting this technology. And you can still have your Oracle OMS system. You can still have your XYZ order management system, but then the integration between that and the Clarity software that is our execution system in the store is where retailers are moving today. So The fundamental use cases in stores today are stock counting, receiving, transfers, returns, markdowns, and also point of sale. So the other component we saw was the need to be able to streamline point of sale, and we're seeing an increased interest in that. We've had RFID-based point of sale deployed for 10 years, but we're seeing a resurgence and interest in that as they try to drive your queues down at checkout. And because of what's taking place in the labor markets around the world, we are seeing a significant revisiting of labor efficiency being a very strong value proposition. So many of the markets that we serve across those 34 countries have got labor challenges due to all kinds of reasons. One of those, of course, would be COVID and the restrictions. And so, and because of that, we're seeing a lot of work with our customers and our customer advisory board to drive further and further labor efficiency so that they can spend less time doing more things and having bigger impact. And some of those, the fruits of those discussions with our really, really smart customers is, I think, panning out and really helping them in the current environment. And then lastly, I would tell you that we are seeing other segments come on board. DIY, electronics, food segments, for example, are all beyond, apparel, footwear, cosmetics, home goods, sporting goods, the five early adopters of the technology. We are seeing a number of other segments now looking at the same problem and looking to see how apparel has led the way, and the apparel and footwear retailers have led the way to solve those problems. So, in summary, basically every step of the supply chain is looking at the technology. And, up before the COVID pandemic, we saw most of the effort being involved in the store. And I think one of the messages that I would share is that everything is moving back throughout the entire supply chain. We're looking at things like circular supply chain benefits, of also another big movement going on that we're involved in for the reuse and resale of garments throughout the world, and have some announcements coming out on that shortly. But it is a different world, and consumers have driven that, as well as just the need to be able to manage our inventory more effectively. So in summary, a couple things. It's inevitable that we move. That retailer is going to move from SKU-based item level. If you've heard me talk before, basically we've been using the barcode and SKU-based inventory management since '74, and nothing's really changed. And I think that what's obvious now is, because of all those dynamics in the marketplace, we are going to see a migration for most of the retail segments over to an item level based set of systems. And that involves both the media that goes down, the technology that goes onto the product, as well as the enterprise systems that are used to support it. Proven ROIs, small, medium, large retailers, less than 12 months, will tout greater than 3% lift in sales and greater than a 30% reduction in cancel rates for your BOPIS orders. The reality is they're significantly larger than that, making the return on investment extremely attractive once you get tags on product. And those ROIs include the tags. They include the cost of labor to do the counts. 90, I didn't mention, but all of the customers we're dealing with are using handheld scans. Many are using them every day. Most are using every week, and some are using every month for their stock counts. But they're using the technology all the time as an execution operations platform in the store. So there's a lot of benefit that's being created beyond just doing the stock counts. I mentioned that many retail segments and regions are now actively adopting, and and we're going to continue to see that grow. So things like electronics are going to be a growing market segment. And again, they're years behind apparel as far as getting source tag product, but that's going to come. We're going to see the same thing with food, and also, inside the food segment is also quick serve restaurants. And so we're going to continue to see movement in quick serve restaurant markets and electronics as well. It's easy to get started. It's, years ago when we were deploying our first stores in 2009 and 10, the technology was still early on in the development process. We're much further along the off-the-shelf products from the reader manufacturers, the cloud technology that's now in place that we leverage from Microsoft. Just makes it so that we can stand up pilots and proof of concepts to build business cases extremely quickly and very affordably as well. So I think that's one of the things that we're going to see is, the concept of I've got to pilot something for 9 months to build a business case. We're not seeing that be accurate. You can frankly build a business case usually in somewhere around 6 weeks, and it only takes you a few weeks potentially to get up and running. So the objective of trying to get a pilot up and running and get a business case out for your next budget cycle is something that is being done around Europe and the United States now quite often. Source tagging, straightforward. It's the ability to take your existing sticker or hang ticket and convert it to an RFID tag, and to be able to do that reliably at a performance level that supports the use cases is really just off the shelf now. And so just like the software and readers and are off the shelf, so is the tag. And the process is in place, and the ability to engage with vendors in Vietnam and all the places where you build product is extremely straightforward and proven. And now it's just about how do you pull that into your enterprise and create the value at those points where you feel like you've got pain points. And then lastly, try to keep the rollouts really simple. Start with handhelds. Get your ROI plus your inventory reduction in the second year. But focus on just getting your inventory accuracy right by using it for receiving and stock count, and potentially move into BOPIS, in-store replenishment, markdowns, et cetera. But if you've seen the presentation for us, we talk about an ROI pyramid where the journey is to start at the bottom of the pyramid with the basis of tags and inventory use cases, and then work your way up into other things, including self-checkout and customer experience and loss prevention. So anyway, it's exciting times for the industry. And it was real exciting. We had the front row seat to watch how our customers that had the technology in place were able to come out of the lockdown in May of last year and make the best of a pretty bad situation. And we're seeing now retailers say they've got to adjust to the new normal, and RFID is a key part of that. So that is it. I'll be glad to take questions now if anybody has any questions.
Okay, Dean, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Folks, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A tool, and those will be queued up for me. First question, you stated that inventory accuracy is less than 70% in most stores. How does this relate to the physical inventory counts we do with our GIS that are supposed to be 99% accurate?
Yeah, so great question. It's the foundational one. The physical counts are done with, as most people know, the barcode scanner typically, and scanning a barcode, and it just counts how many barcodes you scan. And while that process is better than going around with a clipboard, it still creates errors. And so typically we see somewhere around 94%, 92% inventory accuracy, depending on the team. So it's highly dependent on the team that does the count. It's assumed that those are right. Sometimes they'll do some checks and balances, usually where they're going to do checks and balances the team knows about, so you put your best team there. But anyway, somewhere between 92 and 94% is the item level accuracy coming out of those. And then what happens is that you have a plus or minus 2%, as I mentioned, error every week just in receiving. And so what ends up happening is that it degrades over time to get to a place where you're less than 70%. And of course, imagine if you're at let's say you're 70%, you've got some percentage of those items are overstated and some percentage of those are understated. And the worst case is they're frozen, which means you're overstated in your ERP, but you don't have any of them in the store, which means you never sell them, which means you never replenish them. So they're just frozen. And, but that, that's the basis of the business case, is that most retailers, well, all retailers are operating off their ERP. And I will tell you that all retailers are operating with an inaccurate ERP system on their inventory, and item level RFID helps in that.
Okay. In your first slide, you mentioned the new M700 and U9 chips and said they're marvelous. What about the Eco Inspire chip?
Yeah, so the Eco Inspire is a tag that we've taken out the PET layer, which is a plastics layer in the RFID tag, which basically the PET layer in an RFID tag is not biodegradable and or recyclable. And so the industry, due to demand from retailers, has requested us and our competitors to build an eco tag. And our Eco Inspire tag, it gets rid of the PET layer and makes it much more friendly for landfills, as these things are just thrown away.
Okay. And do you need a special type of RFID tag for electronics, for example, an on-metal tag?
Yeah, you do. I mean, it depends on the product. It turns out that on a lot of electronics you don't. You can use the exact same sticker, if you will, label that goes on apparel. But in others, for example, there is some packaging in electronics that has foil in the packaging, and in that case, it's gonna require you to have a tag that can read on a metal product. But it really just depends. Part of what we do is we bring a team of experts in on our team to come in and look at your packaging and look across the product and figure out, is there anything that's unique about it. But there is product out there that we as consumers like to have bright shiny things, and bright shiny things usually mean foil, and that's getting put into the packaging of certain products.
Okay. What's the increase in volume of adoption of RFID labels over the last few months compared with pre-COVID?
Yeah, so great question. We'll see a significant increase in revenue for our company this year, which means that summer last year, coming out of lockdowns, we saw a number of projects that came online that were new. And so, I think year over year, we grew 10% last year in our volume of tags, even with the lockdowns and the supply chain shutdown. So I think we should be seeing well north of 20-30% growth again this year. Okay. But what's most important is a bunch of retailers who, that's at the tag level. What's really important is that there's a bunch of retailers that were sitting on the fence that are moving forward with pilots this year. It'll be rollouts next year, and so on. And so just the momentum we continue to see is significant.
Right. Okay. How does a brand owner get started, and how difficult is it?
Yeah. So we have a canned process and a canned solution that we can put in place with very little integration to get your ROI created in a POC. And if you're a brand owner, like some that might be on this call, that already has tag product because your wholesale business is already requesting tags, we can come in and very quickly evaluate your product, be able to do cycle counts, compare that to your ERP, and that can be done in weeks. If you don't have that, then we set up tagging at the distribution center. in a value add station, tag the product, flow it into a couple stores, and then basically do the same comparison. So it's pretty straightforward. We know the metrics coming out. We've got a complete Power BI back end to be able to metric all of this and support it. So get started with getting your business case defined, and start by getting it into your stores and establishing how could this really help you in concrete terms, not just in PowerPoint slides.
Okay. And how long does it take to get source tagging in place?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the flow and the changing of seasons of your product. So it can take 4 months, it could take 6 or 8 months, depending on what that product development cycle is of the product itself. But once that front end part of the process gets defined, where our team is working with your team to establish what the price ticket's going to look like, what the sticker's going to look like, all getting load all the product information into our data management system and get that all set up. And then getting the tagging done. And when I talk about 4 to 9 months, that means product in stores. That's not getting tags to the facility. So, the process of actually getting tags out the door and into a factory is not the long lead item. It's basically the product development up front and getting the product into containers and on ships coming this way. So.
Okay. When doing a business case analysis, should retailers consider labor savings?
Yeah, I mean, you should definitely, and I think that's, as I mentioned on one of the slides, is that we're seeing a labor efficiency component being an increased interest for retailers, where 3 years ago it wasn't as much. But clearly with the labor markets that are going around, you can. But at the same time, you're also going to have an increase in labor because now you're doing weekly counts. So all of that has to be balanced out with the efficiencies to do BOPIS picking, the efficiencies to do replenishment from back to front, and so on. But all of that gets calculated in the return on investment model that we built.
How do you do a pilot in a few stores when there are inter-store transfers of product?
Yeah, I mean, what we tend to do is there either needs to be retagging at the receiving location where, for example, store A does not have RFID and store B does. I think that's the question. Mm-hmm. And basically, if product comes in that is not tagged, it just needs to be tagged, okay, during the pilot period from store A to store B. And of course, store B is getting its tagged product typically in a pilot from the distribution center. So you just have to handle those edge cases as they come in, and the technology is there with the handheld to do a encoding process on tags very simply. That's how they're doing it in the distribution center usually as well.
Okay. You mentioned 4,000 stores. Are these stores testing the technology or using it every day?
They're using it every day. So these are not pilot stores. And so I mentioned that I think we're at a little over 4,700 stores now around the world using the technology. They're using it every day. It is their system of record. It is their operations. You know, they're using the technology to run the stores from an inventory standpoint. And so, no, it's rollout. We have some stores that have been live since 2014, and they've just upgraded to Android. And we have others that have been live. We went live in the last couple of weeks. And so we went live with over 1,000 stores during COVID last year. So.
Right. Okay. That's all the questions we have, Dean. I really appreciate you taking the time to present today. And of course, we appreciate your support for this event.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.